Hello and welcome to Tea Break Film Reviews. My name's Michelle and today I'm going to be going through the entire history of film as succinctly as I possibly can. Before we start, please consider subscribing to help support this channel so we can keep making videos like this. In 1839, French painter Louis-Jacques Mande Daguerre invented the photo. In 1877, photographer Edward Muybridge successfully reduced the exposure time enough to capture a horse galloping, proving that at one stage in the gallop, all four legs of the horse are in the air at the same time. In the same year, celluloid began being used as a base for photographic emulsions and started being manufactured by George Eastman in New York in 1889. Meanwhile, French-born inventor Louis Le Prince built a motion picture camera and made several short films that he was due to showcase in New York in 1890, but he disappeared during his travels, and his contribution to cinema has remained little known for decades. Instead, the invention of the motion picture camera is often attributed to William Kennedy Laurie Dixon, who worked for the Edison Company. Edison did not hold any patents in Europe, where inventors copied and improved upon his designs, including Auguste and Louis Lumière. They created the cinematograph, a lightweight hand-cranked camera that also functioned as a projector, which they sold internationally, enabling filmmaking in other countries. The Lumière brothers created actualities, which were single-shot documentaries that captured one activity, such as the one that I mentioned in my top 10 horrors film list video, The Arrival of a Train. Near the turn of the century, there was a shift from merely documenting life to creating entertaining stories, most evident in the work of French filmmaker Georges Méliès and American filmmaker Edwin S. Porter, who both experimented with trick and multi-scene films, making the 1902 film A Trip to the Moon and the 1903 film The Great Train Robbery, respectively. Pathé and rival company Gaumont Pictures dominated pre-World War I production, exhibition and sales in Europe, manufacturing equipment, opening foreign offices, and acquiring theatre chains. In the US, film exchanges and Nickelodeons opened up across the country, and film production moved to warmer states such as California, Florida, and Texas, because it was easier to film in these climates all year round. And in the case of Hollywood, there was a wide range of geography all in one place. Runtimes began to increase, heavily influenced by theatre shows which were being directly captured and projected using film. There came a new age of multiple reel films, or features as they became known, such as the 1912 Italian film Quo Vadis, which wowed audiences. It featured huge sets recreating ancient Rome and used 5,000 extras. Importantly, it had an admission price of a whopping $1, and exhibitors realized that it was easier to advertise and charge more for features rather than a series of shorts. During this era, director D.W.Griffith experimented with narrative techniques that helped shape the cinematography and editing standards in the industry that we have today. Examples include using multiple camera setups, i.e. wide, medium, and close-up shots, as well as the use of tracking and panning shots. He also used intercutting of two seemingly unrelated scenes to imply a connection, prefiguring the Soviet theories of montage by about a decade. Up until World War I, European cinema dominated the industry, especially France and Italy. However, during the war, film production virtually ceased in Europe, whilst American cinema prospered immensely. Motion pictures became a national obsession, and the Hollywood studio system was established, churning out films in an assembly line fashion, with each studio becoming known for a specific genre and style. In Germany, General Erich Ludendorff, frustrated with the slew of anti-German films that were coming in during the war, ordered the creation of the UFA, which became the single largest studio in Europe, producing most of the films associated with the golden age of German cinema during the Weimar Republic. This included the German Expressionist movement that used distorted sets and lighting to create specific moods and reflect the psyche of the characters. Perhaps the most well-known expressionist film is Fritz Lang's Metropolis. Films with synchronized musical scores exist early in film history, but it was only after the invention of the sophisticated disc system called the Vitaphone that recording dialogue became viable. Warner Brothers bought the rights to the Vitaphone and used it to record the 1927 film The Jazz Singer, which was a phenomenal success and marked the start of the sound revolution, taking a mere 15 months for the rest of the Hollywood studios to all have sound. America's sound technology was exported worldwide, and the new age of sound gave rise to directors such as Alfred Hitchcock, as well as the French Impressionist movement and the start of Bollywood cinema in India. Sound led to many changes. Acting became more than just movement. Some actors failed to learn their lines, had unappealing or unintelligible voices, directors could no longer direct their actors during filming, the film industry started employing critics, playwrights, and novelists to write their scripts with dialogue, and musicals became popular as a genre. In 1934, the production code was implemented, prohibiting nudity, violence, and profanity in film. If a character did anything immoral, then they must be redeemed or punished by the end of the film. This code dictated American cinema for the next 20 years. In Japan, motion pictures thus far were akin to kabuki theatre, with dialogue and narration being delivered by performers called benshis who stood to the side of the screen. The coming of sound was resisted by the benshi, but the conversion was inevitable, and the Japanese film industry evolved its own studio system and became one of the most prolific industries in the world, though very few films were exported out of Japan. As with sound, colour was also present in early film history. However, it was painstakingly hand-painted frame by frame. The invention that truly revolutionized colour was the three-colour system invented by Technicolor in 1932. However, it was quite expensive and would only come into widespread use after the Great Depression. When Hitler came into power in 1933, German cinema became controlled by the Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, which reviewed every film before release for the next 12 years. Already many German filmmakers had immigrated to America, but this forced more people to follow. Perhaps the most famous films produced during Nazi Germany are documentaries by Leni Riefenstahl, including Triumph of the Will. Similarly, in Soviet Russia, film was used to increase support for the socialist cause, proving very successful given its ability to be understood by the largely illiterate working class. The All-Union State Institute of Cinematography was created, and one of its teachers, Lev Kuleshov, and two of his students, Sergei Eisenstein and Vsevolod Pudovkin, became famous for their experiments with montage. As Japan became more militarized, cinema shifted to social criticism, which inevitably led to the government imposing a strict code of censorship, just like in Germany and the Soviet Union. Famous director Akira Kurosawa ignored these restrictions and continued to make period dramas, including samurai epics that earned him fame internationally. After the war, the film industries of Germany, the Soviet Union, and Japan were enfeebled, having all limited their production during the war to predominantly propaganda. Both Japan and Germany managed to rebuild their industries in the 1950s and 60s, but focused mainly on quantity rather than quality, to appease their domestic markets and compete with TV. This was a similar case to India, where the general Indian populace couldn't afford a TV, so there was no serious competition. The industry that did not recover after the war was the Soviet Union, where although there were some very impressive literary adaptations made, most other filmmaking was heavily monitored and suppressed. Directors Sergei Parajanov and Andrei Tarkovsky both had their work heavily criticized and tampered with by Soviet censors. Italy's early surrender meant that a lot of their facilities stayed intact, and post-war cinema developed into the neo-realist movement, with directors such as Roberto Rossellini. The neo-realist movement inspired other movements around the world, such as British social realism, Brazilian cinema nuovo, and the French and Czech New Wave. The French New Wave was guided heavily by André Bazin and Alexandre Astruc's theoretical writings. They inspired a whole fleet of film critics such as François Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard to begin making films that rejected the cinematic norms that had thus far been established. During World War II, America had a stable film industry, with many films made to encourage morale and inspire patriotism. However, as the war continued, films had increasingly serious themes, and some documentaries were shot on location, such as John Ford's 1942 film The Battle of Midway. Citizen Kane, one of the most influential films in film history, was made during this period. The increasingly widespread use of TVs in the home weakened the film industry and led to technological developments such as the use of widescreen or cinemascope as it was called, in order to provide something that TV could not. In 1948, the studio system was disbanded to allow for healthy competition. The industry became increasingly less about big-budget spectacles and more about low-budget, socially conscious filmmaking that commented on topics such as racism, alcoholism, and mental illness. The pesky production code was dissolved in 1958, and in 1968, the Motion Picture Association of America created a rating system, which meant that there were no limits on what people could make. This heralded the new Hollywood movement that involved mature themes such as violence and sex from directors such as Martin Scorsese and Stanley Kubrick. This period also featured the start of one of the biggest sci-fi franchises ever, Star Wars. Other countries around the world did not have a particularly strong national film industry, but became known for producing specific auteurs, such as the satire extraordinaire Louis Buñuel from Spain and Ingmar Bergman from Sweden. Major advances in computer-generated VFX led to a whole roster of exciting films, such as The Matrix. More people than ever had access to filming and editing equipment. Directors such as Spike Jonze, Spike Lee, and Quentin Tarantino gained a cult following for their unconventional and low-budget films. As the internet progressed, it became a marketing tool, exemplified by the 1999 cult hit The Blair Witch Project. In Britain, the industry declined in the 1980s, but was revived by the creation of the TV network Channel 4 that commissioned original films, as well as the British National Lottery that became a source of funding in 1994. Australia gained international attention following the release of the 1982 film Mad Max 2, renamed The Road Warrior, and in the 1990s directors such as Baz Luhrmann and Jane Campion solidified the country's presence on the international scene. Neighbouring country's New Zealand director, Peter Jackson, meanwhile had started work on one of the most ambitious literary adaptations in history, The Lord of the Rings. Once Mikhail Gorbachev came into power in 1990 and the Soviet Union officially dissolved soon after, there was more freedom in Russia and the former republics to create previously suppressed material, especially in Poland and Hungary. However, smaller film industries such as those in Bulgaria and Romania had a slower progression, given that their main source of funding was taken away and they converted a lot of their theatres into new businesses. Hong Kong had become known for its martial arts films during the 1960s, and these extended into crime and gangster films during the 1980s, with directors such as John Woo. In the 1990s, director Wong Kar-wai and Australian cinematographer Christopher Doyle gained international acclaim for their highly stylized and unique work. Asian countries such as China, Taiwan, and Korea had virtually no cinematic presence until the loosening of restrictions in the 1980s and 90s. That paved the way for new voices to be heard, such as directors Zhang Yimou and Ang Lee. In Africa, directors such as Mufida Tlatley created films that commented on the themes of education, environment, women's rights, and colonialism. In Iran, directors such as Mohsen Makhmalbaf created their own quiet contemplative style that mixed reality with fiction. And in Denmark, director Lars von Trier created the movement of Dogma 95 that argued against technical gadgetry and for realism. Over the last 2 decades, the most revolutionary developments within the film industry have been the widespread access to equipment and software, which means that people can now make films on their smartphones, as well as the proliferation of streaming services, which have heralded an entirely new way of consuming content, allowing everyone to have access to an unbelievably large library of films all the time, rather than to a schedule. The lasting effect of these advancements on the industry remains to be seen, as well as what the impact will be of this current pandemic. Thank you for watching. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe and hit the bell icon if you want to see more videos, and comment with your thoughts on the topic. Which parts of film history would you be interested in hearing more about? For more film content, feel free to follow us on Twitter, Letterboxd, and Facebook. Links in the description. Otherwise, this has been Tea Break Film Reviews. My name's Michelle, and I hope you have a great day.